The day Maren signed the divorce papers was the same day she finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. She sat in the parking lot of the attorney's office for almost 20 minutes afterward, engine running, hands still on the wheel. Not crying, just sitting. Like her body needed a moment to understand that the weight it had been carrying for 11 years was gone, and it didn't quite know how to stand upright without it. She thought about calling her mom. Then she thought about how her mom would say "I told you so" in that quiet way she had, the way that wasn't really gloating but still landed like one. So instead, Maren just put the car in drive and pulled out onto Elm Street and let the radio fill the silence. The song that came on was something she and Derek used to dance to in the kitchen. She changed the station immediately. People who knew Maren before Derek always described her the same way. Sharp, funny. The kind of woman who walked into a room and knew exactly what she wanted from it. Her college roommate Joelle used to joke that Maren had been born with a compass inside her chest. True north, always. She met Derek Ashford when she was 26, at a work event she almost didn't attend. He was standing near the bar with his jacket sleeves pushed up, laughing at something the man next to him had said, and when he turned and caught her eye, he didn't look away. Most men looked away. Derek just smiled like he'd been waiting for her to walk in. They were married 14 months later. Her mom, Patrice, wore yellow to the wedding because she said white weddings made her feel like she was attending a funeral, and Maren had laughed so hard she'd cried, and Derek had dabbed at her mascara with a handkerchief he'd actually remembered to bring. Maren thought about that handkerchief a lot in the years that followed. She thought about the version of him who carried one. The first year was good, better than good. They were renting a 2-bedroom in Raleigh, with a balcony that got the evening light, and Derek was working as a project manager for a construction firm. And Maren was 3 years into her career as a pharmaceutical sales rep, which meant she traveled a few days a month, but made good money and loved the independence of it. She was good at the job, genuinely good. Her regional director, a woman named Cora, who wore the same pearl earrings every single day, told Maren she had the best close rate on the team and that she was being tracked for a senior territory position. Maren was proud of that. She'd worked hard for it. The shift was so gradual she couldn't have told you when it started. That's the thing no one warns you about. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It arrives like weather changing, slow, incremental, until one day you look up and you don't recognize the sky. Derek didn't like her traveling. He said it at first the way someone says they miss you. The apartment feels weird when you're gone. I hate sleeping alone. And Maren had found that sweet. She'd started calling more, checking in. He'd relax for a while, and then the next trip would come, and he'd get quiet in a way that filled every room. She started cutting trips shorter, then finding reasons to work her territory differently, cluster her calls, reduce her overnights. Cora noticed. She pulled Maren into her office one Thursday and asked carefully if everything was okay at home. Maren said yes. That was the first lie. And it was so easy she almost didn't notice she'd told it. By the time they'd been married 4 years, Maren had quietly let the senior territory opportunity pass. She told herself it wasn't the right time. They were talking about starting a family. It made sense to be more stable. She believed it mostly because believing it was easier than the alternative. What she didn't say to herself, not yet, was that Derek had stopped being proud of her work and started being threatened by it. The compliments had gone somewhere. In their place was a kind of ambient resentment that she could feel but not name, like a low hum under everything. He'd say things at dinner parties that were technically jokes. Maren's the real breadwinner, I'm just arm candy. And people would laugh and Maren would laugh too. And later in the car he'd go silent in a way that lasted for days. She learned to stop talking about work. Then she learned to not mention her salary. Then she learned not to bring up Cora's name, because something about Maren admiring another woman made Derek's jaw go tight in a way she couldn't explain but had memorized. By year 5, she was managing her own personality in real time around him. Calculating, softening, editing. She didn't notice she was doing it. Not really, the way you don't notice you've started ducking in a room with a low ceiling until someone else walks in and stands up straight. They had a son, Tobias, born on a Tuesday in March, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with Derek's nose and Maren's eyes and a hunger to be held that felt familiar in a way Maren couldn't articulate. She loved him so completely it reorganized something inside her. She took the full 12 weeks of leave and then came back to work. And Derek's quietness when she returned had a new edge to it. Tobias needs his mother, Derek said one night, matter-of-factly, while Maren was packing her bag for a 2-day trip. Tobias has both his parents, she said. I'll be back Thursday. Derek didn't say anything. He went to bed without kissing her goodnight, and in the morning he was fine again, easy and warm, as if nothing had happened, and Maren had spent the entire drive to the airport trying to figure out which version of the conversation was real. She resigned from the sales position 8 months later. She told herself it was her choice. She had a toddler. The travel was a lot. Cora sent her a card that said, "You'll be missed." The door is always open, and Maren had put the card in a drawer in the kitchen where she didn't have to look at it. She became, without entirely meaning to, a woman whose entire life was someone else's logistics. She managed Tobias's schedule, Derek's dry cleaning, the grocery order, the dentist appointments, the birthday cards to Derek's parents, the filter replacements on the HVAC system, the neighborhood HOA emails that Derek forwarded to her without comment. She managed and managed and managed, and somewhere in the managing, she stopped knowing what she actually wanted to have for dinner, which seems like a small thing until it isn't. Derek's mother, Eleanor, used to say that Maren was lucky. "Derek is such a provider," Eleanor would say, and Maren would smile and refill her coffee, and not point out that she herself had once provided very well, that she had in fact been the one with the better benefits package when they'd gotten married, that she had given up more than Eleanor seemed to know or care. Derek started staying late at the office in year 7. First once a week, then 2 or 3 times. He'd come home smelling like himself. Not like someone else, nothing that obvious, but with a looseness about him that he didn't have when he left in the morning, like he'd exhaled somewhere she hadn't been. Maren noticed. She was very good at noticing things. She'd always been. She didn't say anything. That's what she kept returning to later, in the therapist office, in the car at night, in the parking lot after signing those papers. Why didn't I say anything? And the honest answer, the one she hated, was that she'd been afraid of what she'd learn. That by then she'd gotten so practiced at managing the atmosphere, managing his moods, managing her own reactions, that she managed this too. She archived it, filed it somewhere she didn't have to open. She went back to work instead. Part-time at first, consulting, and then a position with a smaller healthcare company, nothing like her old salary but something. A reason to put on real shoes. A meeting to attend that had nothing to do with her household. Derek said he was supportive. He said all the right things. But the apartment had a new temperature now, and she felt it every time she got home before he did, and he came in and clocked her laptop open on the kitchen table. He'd make dinner quietly. He'd put Tobias to bed. He'd be pleasant in a way that meant nothing. She should have left then. She thought about it. She had money of her own again, not much but enough, and she had Cora's card in the drawer, and she had a mother 3 states away, who would have driven through the night if Maren had just asked. But she didn't ask. She kept thinking about Tobias. She kept thinking about how divorce was going to feel like failure. And she hated how much she cared about that, hated that she'd been raised in a world that made walking away from the wrong thing feel like something to be ashamed of. She stayed. She kept staying. She perfected the staying. And then Maren got sick. It started with exhaustion that she chalked up to everything. Tobias's sleep regression, her new job, the time of year. Then joint pain that her doctor said was stress-related. Then a rash across her left cheekbone that didn't go away, and a round of blood work, and a rheumatologist's office in Durham that smelled like industrial cleaner, and made her wait 45 minutes past her appointment time. Lupus. Systemic. Not the worst version, the doctor explained, with a tone that she supposed was meant to be reassuring, but requiring monitoring, medication, and the management of her stress levels. The management of her stress levels. She'd almost laughed. The flares were unpredictable. There were weeks she felt fine, almost herself, and weeks where getting out of bed felt like something to be accomplished, like a task. Tobias was 7 by then, old enough to sense things, and he'd started bringing her cups of water without being asked and sitting close to her on the couch in the evenings, with his head against her arm. Derek's response to her illness had surprised her, but maybe it shouldn't have. He'd been attentive for the first month. Solicitous. He'd gone to one appointment with her and asked good questions, and she'd felt something shift back toward him, some warmth she thought they'd lost. She'd thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is how we get back to each other. What she hadn't seen, because she wasn't yet looking, was that Derek had used that month's grace to build something on the side. She found out on a Thursday in October, 2 years into her diagnosis, when she was cleaning out an old jacket of his to take to Goodwill, and found a receipt in the inner pocket from a restaurant she'd never been to with a credit card that was not their joint account. She stood in the bedroom for a long time holding that receipt. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed. Then she laid back and stared at the ceiling and let herself know what she already knew. His name, the man whose account it was, the name printed on the receipt beneath the total, and the generous tip, was connected to a separate email address she found when she finally looked, calmly, with a steadiness that scared her a little. The email was full of what she'd expected. The other woman's name was Simone. She was 31. She worked with Derek, which was almost too predictable to be believed. The emails went back 18 months. Maren did not cry. She closed the laptop and went and made Tobias's lunch for the next day and put it in the refrigerator and took her evening medication and went to bed. She spent 3 weeks deciding. Not about whether to leave. She knew, from the moment she found that receipt, that she was leaving. The decision she was making was more careful than that. It was about how. It was about making sure she had everything she needed and that Tobias was protected, and that she was not doing something she would undo later out of fear or fatigue or the low-grade loneliness of starting over. She called Cora, not about the job, just to hear her voice, to talk to someone who had known her before. They ended up talking for 2 hours, and by the end of it, Maren had a referral to a family law attorney. And Cora had made her promise to call if she needed anything, and Maren had cried then, in the kitchen, sitting on the floor with her back against the cabinet, the first time she'd really cried about any of it. It felt like releasing something she'd been holding underwater for years. She hired the attorney, a woman named Hartley, who wore no jewelry except a watch, and spoke in a way that made Maren feel like she was finally being taken seriously. Together they were methodical. Maren had started working full-time again, which helped. She'd quietly opened a separate account 6 months before she found the receipt. Some part of her, the part that was still sharp and compass-directed, had been preparing without fully admitting it. She told Derek on a Sunday evening, after Tobias was asleep. She'd considered various versions of this conversation for weeks, and in the end had decided to say only what was true and only what was necessary. "I know about Simone," she said, "and I want a divorce." Derek had gone through several versions of himself in the minutes that followed. Denial, then a kind of exhausted confession, then an attempt at bargaining that she'd expected and already decided not to entertain. He'd said, "We can fix this," and she'd said, "I'm not asking your permission," and that had been, more or less, the end of the conversation that mattered. What followed was months of paperwork and logistics, and the particular misery of dismantling a life you'd built, except that the misery was also underneath, a kind of relief so vast she couldn't look at it directly, like the sun. She told her mom on a Monday night, her phone propped against the kitchen backsplash, and Patrice had listened to all of it without interrupting, which was unusual enough that Maren noticed it. When she finished, her mom said, "You know, I always thought you made yourself smaller for him. I never knew how to say it without you getting defensive." Maren was quiet for a moment, then she said, "You could have just said it anyway, Mom." And her mom laughed a little broken and said, "I know. I'm sorry I didn't." Tobias handled it the way 8-year-olds handle things, in pieces over time with questions that arrived at unexpected moments. "Do you and Dad still like each other?" he'd asked once, very seriously, while she was washing his hair. Maren had said, "We both love you very much." He'd considered that and then said, "That's not what I asked." And she'd looked at his face, this small, serious face that was half hers, and she'd said, "We do the best we can for you. That's what I can promise." He'd accepted that. Kids were more resilient than adults gave them credit for, but they were also more perceptive, which meant you couldn't talk around them. Tobias knew things without being told. Maren had learned to be more honest with him than she'd been with herself. For years. And there was something in that, in the discipline of honesty for his sake, that had slowly made her more honest with herself too. She moved into a rental on the east side of Raleigh in February. 2 bedrooms, small but with good light and a yard big enough for Tobias to kick a soccer ball around. She'd repainted the kitchen herself, a warm sage green, on a Saturday afternoon with Tobias on a step stool, trying to help and getting more paint on his elbows than the walls. She'd laughed so hard her sides ached. She called Cora the next week. They had coffee first. Maren told her that she was ready to work again, really work, and Cora had looked at her the way she used to look at a sales projection she liked. Steady, satisfied, and said, "I've been waiting for you to say that." She was 40 months sober from her own marriage by the time she started back, not that she thought of it that way. That was Joelle's word, sober, and it had stuck. There were mornings she woke up in her own bedroom, the sage green kitchen waiting on the other side of the door, Tobias's shoes by the front mat, and she felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd forgotten it had a name. Unclenched, that was the word. She felt unclenched. It didn't mean easy. Easy was not the thing she was after. She still got tired faster than she used to, managed her medication, had months where the lupus reminded her it hadn't gone anywhere. She and Derek had a co-parenting arrangement that worked on paper and mostly worked in practice, with the ordinary awkwardness of people who once knew each other very well and now had to learn what it meant to know each other differently. She felt things about that she hadn't expected. Not grief exactly, but something adjacent. The way you can mourn a house that made you miserable once you're safe enough to stop being miserable in it. She let herself feel it. She was learning to do that, to let things move through her instead of managing them into drawers. Joelle came to visit in April, and they sat on Maren's little back porch with a bottle of wine, and Joelle said, "You look like yourself. Like the version of you I met at 19. Maren thought about that. Then she said, "I think I look like a different version, newer." Joelle tilted her head like she was considering it. "Yeah," she said, "maybe that's better. Maybe it was." Maren thought so. She thought so on the morning she walked Tobias to the bus stop and felt the cold air on her face and didn't brace against it. She thought so when Cora called to tell her the senior territory was opening again. A different region, better accounts, and was she interested? And Maren said yes before she'd even finished the sentence, quickly, the way she used to say yes to things, before she'd learned to make herself wait for permission that was never coming. She thought about Derek sometimes, less often now. When she did, she tried to think about him honestly, not as a villain. He was a person who had failed her in specific ways, which wasn't the same as being monstrous, just insufficient, and that honesty was something she'd had to work toward. It was still a work. She wasn't done, but she was building something. That was the thing she held on to. The day she signed the divorce papers, she'd sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes and let the old life go. And then she put the car in drive and pulled out onto Elm Street and changed the station when the wrong song came on. The next song was something she didn't recognize. She turned it up anyway,